Here we go on our second lecture of the semester. We finished with the Sumerians last class, and I was tempted to simply abbreviate things and move directly into the Greeks and the Persians, but we don't want to assume that there is a direct line of development from the Sumerians to the Persian civilization. It'll take a while. Guess why? This is one of my stupid jokes coming. We don't want to assume that we can simply move straight from the Sumerians to the Persians, because that would make Assyrians of you and me. The intermediate stage, the Assyrians. Now I really am going to blaze through the material, unless we want to talk about it, and you're welcome to dive as deeply into some of this stuff as you want. But the Assyrians are an important line of development, and in some ways maybe even more advanced than the Persians, who are our main topic of the following lecture. But from about 900 to 612 BC, the Assyrians were the terror of the same territories originally brought under the yoke of the Sumerian civilization. Bless you. But they developed a military that outstripped the capabilities of that Sumerian military that we looked at in the Standard of Ur. The Sumerians had that four-wheeled chariot, you may remember, likely good for straight-line attacks, not so maneuverable in hand-to-hand combat, some javelins or throwing spears, bronze swords. But that military, too, was brought together only on summons. When the Sumerian leaders needed military, they called those warriors together for the occasion. The Assyrians were a little bit of a step forward, following up on the Sumerians, in that they were so constantly involved in conflict that they created one of the world's first professional standing armies. It was always ready for action, depending on what the Assyrians needed to do. And they are reputed to have been, they probably weren't entirely converted to iron yet. This was still an age largely devoted to bronze weaponry, but they had mastered some of the techniques of iron smelting, iron mining and smelting. So some iron weapons began to make their way into that Assyrian military. And the extent of the Assyrian Empire was considerably larger than the Sumerians who preceded them. There's one of the most famous of the Assyrian leaders, Synaparin. I'm going to experiment with reading a few poems this semester. 705 to 681 BC. This is a relief from his palace at Nineveh. I'll show you that in just a moment. Some of what we're going to look at is from the Assyrian perspective. He had a world of troubles in his day, lots of opposition locally, domestically, and our focus mostly for today and the coast of the Levant, the modern-day Israel and Palestine, regions of modern-day Israel and Palestine. This was his capital city, Nineveh. These are pictures of some of our troops back when we were in Iraq. The former leader, you guys may not be too familiar with him, Saddam Hussein, foolishly attempted to rebuild Nineveh, not really based on reliable archaeological information. So a lot of damage was done, but this is part of his attempted reconstruction. There is an artist's depiction of what the Assyrian capital of Nineveh might have looked like in its heyday. Here it is on the Tigris River. Babylon was one of the real sources of trouble, and Sennacherib ultimately, in order to put down some of his rivals, destroyed Babylon. But some of his chief trouble came from this region over here, kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel, the two sections of the Hebrew homeland. Were not convinced that they needed to pay their tribute, their taxes to the Assyrian Empire. They were pretty far distant from Nineveh, and they thought to themselves, maybe if we just don't pay, it'll be okay. There's a closer look. There's Jerusalem, kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah. Israel was intimidated into cooperating, but Judah and King Hezekiah in particular, if you remember your Sunday school lessons, if you went through Sunday school, you may have encountered some of this. King Hezekiah was reluctant and felt like the walls of Jerusalem and the distance from Nineveh gave him enough protection to defy the Assyrian leader. So Sennacherib gathered together his Assyrian army and marched it all the way over to the coast to teach King Hezekiah and the kingdom of Judah a lesson. You ready for the next one? They're part of the ancient wall of Jerusalem that was well defended, and Hezekiah didn't choose Jerusalem as his first target. Once he got there, he selected a nearby town, still very well fortified, but it appeared to be of a little more susceptible. Hezekiah had spared no expense. He made sure that Jerusalem had an external water supply. He mined out a tunnel from a nearby spring, I think a mile or miles away. You can visit it today when you go to Jerusalem. And water still flows through that tunnel. It's one of the big tourist sites. It's a cisterns underneath Jerusalem. Sennacherib selected Lachish near Jerusalem as his first target. Have you guys read any poems by Lord Byron, George Gordon? Here is the start of his famous poem, The Destruction of Sennacherib. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea when the blue waves rolled nightly on deep Galilee. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved, and forever grew still. There are three more stanzas, much to the same effect. But apparently the angel of death didn't do that until after the Assyrians had destroyed Lachish and subdued King Hezekiah and marched away a large number of his subjects as captives. There are several different versions of what happens. I'm going to show you a few pictures from Nineveh. Some of these relate directly to the siege of Lachish. Some are Assyrian images of other types of military actions, and ask you guys just to take a quick look and see what might be different in some of these images from the Sumerian military that we looked at in our first class. The basic point, hopefully, argument that I'm making here is that the Sumerians have stepped it up in a number of specific categories that we didn't see present in the Sumerian image. Now, here's one of the first one from the siege of Lachish in 701 BC. The Assyrians marched over to teach King Hezekiah a lesson, and they didn't go for Jerusalem first of all. They went for the outlying town, well fortified, but the outlying town of Lachish. Just looking at some of these images, do you see anything new? Huh?
Over there.
Do we have archers? Yep. Right up here, riding in the chariot, we have archers, and here standing. Some archers who can do some damage from a distance. We did not see any archers in the Sumerian military. Yeah.
It's not like an open field where someone the wall.
Yeah, this was something, entirely new. We speculated, based on what we saw with the Sumerians, that they were mostly focused on open field battle. They didn't have any technology, at least visible in that standard of Ur, that would allow them to directly attack a fortification. They could theoretically surround it and try to starve them out, but that's sometimes a year-long operation. But here we have the Assyrians actively going at the walled city. They're actively going for at the fortification.
So either in stealth or I'm not sure if it's showing a tunnel, them tunneling under the city walls or something stealth. But
Yeah, that could be. Let's see, right up. Is this what you're referring to? I think this might be. We have perhaps some tunneling activity, or maybe there. And there is a picture coming up in which you see them with little crowbar-like instruments trying to pry away stones from the fortification. So this is what we can call siegecraft. And it is new with the Assyrians. They didn't have to just surround Lachish and wait for them to starve, which would have been quite some time because they had a lot of reserves and they had internal wells for water. The Assyrians went there, and their intention was to take it down, actively invest that fortification and do it. So we've got archers here. How about the chariot? We had a four-wheeled chariot with the Sumerians.
I have two wheels.
Yeah. Could you turn a little bit better, you think, with two wheels? Yeah, so in terms of chariots, it's an improvement. This one can likely turn and is quite maneuverable on the battlefield. I don't know what, they certainly had no air force, but here we appear to have, I don't know exactly what to say about that, perhaps a guiding spirit. I don't think this was terribly significant, but there is someone throwing a rock with a sling. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And up here, this is probably a good vocabulary term for us. Can you tell what they're doing? Looting, maybe? Yeah, they're coming in by water and they've got supplies. So this is goes under the military term, or my goodness, if we've got business majors in the class, you probably know this one. This could be something you do as a career, logistics. There are some local grocery stores having trouble stocking certain items. I think toilet paper still is okay, but that's logistical. That's an issue of how to move supplies from one point to the place at which they're needed. And modern militaries deal a lot with that, logistical issues. But the Assyrian military, as a standing professional army, had done a lot of thinking about it. And there you have an aspect of logistical planning. Knowing he was going to be on the coast, Sennacherib sent his navy around with supplies, and here they are landing supplies. So the army marched overland, and the supplies came in from the water, at least some supplies. So logistical planning is an important Assyrian development. Here's that two-wheeled chariot. And down here again, actively investing the structure. Here's one we didn't see. Archery. But this is the logical development from, I mean, we celebrated the two-wheeled chariot as an evolution on the four-wheeled chariot because it's more maneuverable. But truth be told, this is the best way to maneuver. So they've done away with the chariot altogether, and they're simply mounted. And to be official about it, we can call this cavalry. A mounted cavalry. We did not see that anywhere in the standard of Ur. The Sumerians did not have a cavalry, but the Assyrians not only had the better chariot, but they had mounted warriors capable of moving rapidly on the battlefield. There's a lot of stuff going on here related to siegecraft. You can tell they're not just waiting for the people inside to starve, they're going in after them, and they're going to take care of this structure without using a lot of resources themselves. What do you see happening here, Philip?
You see either a siege tower or a battering ram on one side.
Yep, that's what you've got over here. This is a battering ram. You've got wheels down here. It's armored on top, so the guys inside pushing it, they can hear the arrows whacking down on the outside shell, the armored shell of the battering ram, but they continue pushing it forward to smash at the door, try and break open the door. So the Assyrians had thought about this quite a bit, and they came with equipment. They had siege engines, things that could bring that castle, that walled fortification, to terms without simply waiting on people to get hungry. And over here, a couple of guys climbing up a ladder. It's a simple tool, but for a walled city, pretty darn useful. So it goes in the category of a siege engine, siege equipment. And let's see, what else do we have? We've got people tumbling from the walls. And I think this is maybe the best demonstration. We talked about tunneling. These guys look like they're swimming, but I think the intention is to indicate that they are tunneling underground. So not only are they battering at the door, not only are they climbing up a ladder to try and engage on the ramparts, but they're also tunneling under the defensive fortifications to try and collapse a portion of the wall. The Assyrians were doing lots of different things to bring down those walled fortifications. Let's see what we have here. And this is another aspect of it. You can see the guys down here with sticks. They're dislodging stones from the wall. Another aspect of siegecraft. These guys too are underground, trying to destabilize the foundations. Now this one, I don't think you can guess what this is, but I'm really impressed with the Assyrians the more I look at this image.
Is that a great map of the city?
It could be. Well, it's a good guess, but this is actually the battering ram. There are the wheels down there. And here's the shell, the armored shell of the battering ram. But what you have here are lit torches. The defenders up on the wall are trying to throw lit torches down on the battering ram to set it on fire. And the Assyrians are so clever, this is a ladle of water. They have a built-in fire extinguisher. So as the torches land, they pour water to try and put out the fire. So they're up there battering away, and they're not deterred by either the arrows or torches and fire being tossed down on the battering ram. They have a way of putting out the fire if the defenders manage to set it afire. So a pretty complete system. They have logistical planning, they have siegecraft, they have cavalry, professional standing army. The Assyrians were a noticeable and terrifying step forward They have a very bad reputation in history as being ruthless and bloodthirsty. Part of that is from the biblical stories. Part of it is because they wanted that to be the reputation. We've been looking at their own images, and this too is an Assyrian image. We saw one instance of battlefield humiliation in the Sumerian standard of Ur, but the Assyrians carved lots and lots of pictures of themselves doing awful, awful things to the people they beat. This is one of them. At Lachish, they breached those fortifications, and the basic standing principle throughout military history is if the attackers have to breach, if the people inside give up without causing a lot of trouble before the walls are breached, then there might be some terms of leniency. But if the defenders have to go the final step of actually breaching the walls, the defenders can't expect at that point, once they see they're doomed, you can't raise your hands and expect mercy. And the Assyrians did not show mercy. These are the elders of Lachish being flayed. The Assyrians made a point not just of humiliating, but really frightening anyone who might be watching or learning about or hearing the stories about the Assyrian conquest of Lachish. So the elders inside of the city who did not surrender in a timely manner were tortured publicly. These are the elders stretched out and their skin is being shaved away with some type of sharp device. There's another aspect of psychological terror, psychological warfare. So many historians cite the Assyrians as, if not the first to develop this technique, certainly one of the first to really play it up, really make it a conscious effort to advertise themselves as ruthless and fearsome, because they didn't want to have to spend the money. They didn't want to have to breach the walls and bring all those shiploads of equipment in and supplies. They wanted people to simply bend the knee and pay the money. That's much cheaper and much easier. And typically, that's the way it went. But here you have some of the Lachish defenders being impaled as a demonstration of what happens if you don't surrender. But again, these are not just bad stories about the Assyrians. These are images produced by the Assyrians. They wanted it to be known. They wanted to have that reputation. Any last thoughts about the Assyrians? I think that was a pretty business-like assessment. And there is one last image of this I believe is the advent of the so-called lost tribes. Many of the inhabitants of the kingdom of Judah were actively marched away. Here you have them, I think, in the bottom picture with the kind of their hands on the shoulders of the person in front of them being marched away into captivity. So many of them were taken back into the heartland of the Assyrian Empire because Sennacherib didn't trust them to stay there any longer in large numbers. And they were marched back in, and history lost track of those lost tribes, the Israelites who were taken back into captivity. I believe Daniel in the lion's den was one of those guys. He was way back. He had been taken back. I may be wrong about that. I think so. All right, let's wrap up the Assyrians. I'll go back in and type in some of what we discussed.